Thank you. So welcome. I hope everyone is well during these crazy times. I am super excited to start this interagency meeting today. We have the group that did the social needs assessment, the wider all ages one, and also the senior social needs assessment. So we'll get started here. I know it's just 11:30. Some folks might trickle in, but they have a presentation for us about the findings. So hopefully you brought your questions. And Tim from Moorhouse Associates, he presented yesterday at Town Council and it went really well, but this time we have a little bit longer and we have the whole team here, all three. So first we'll start with Mr. Rob Parks of RC Strategies.
Great, thanks very much, Andrea. So it's a pleasure to be here. It'd be nicer to be there in person and see all of you, but I do recognize a few faces there for those who have the cameras on, and please don't feel that you do need to turn them on. If you're like me, you get tired of looking at yourself on these things, so I sort of sometimes close one of my eyes, can't see myself. So thanks very much. We wanted to walk through some of the findings that we gathered as we did these assessments, but really the main purpose of this is to present the recommendations and the actions that have come out from the studies. And so, as Andrea mentioned, there's a couple of different ones that we were all involved in, and that's what we're planning to do here. So Christopher, the next slide, please. So actually just, if you just step back there, I'll just, so we wanted to tell you a little bit about the studies. It's kind of a reminder, I think, to you about what we were trying to achieve with them and then what the process is. We'll talk about some of those findings, primarily a couple of findings from the survey, and you've probably seen those through the report. But as I said, the main bulk of it will be the conclusions and the implementation. We're going to split it up a little bit as well, just so when you start nodding off listening to my voice, we'll bring in somebody else and that'll perk you up for a little bit. So about the studies now. So we did the work for the studies, and it was through the Clearwater Regional FCSS. And so that's why we're working with Andrea and Rebecca. And so certainly, as you know, it's a regional FCSS, so supported by the three municipalities, and that guided the work that we did, and particularly in the engagement component to it. So I'm going to talk briefly about the seniors needs assessment, and then Christopher will talk about the broader one. And so it's kind of interesting that we did have the two studies underway. We did start the seniors one before the broader social one was. So that was the first project, and that was the one that I worked on solely. And then when the other one came about, I joined up with the other two gentlemen to work with Andrea on that. And so the idea with the seniors needs assessment was really to understand the needs of seniors in the community. And so, you know, often when we do work in different communities, we identify seniors as a particular pool of people or a segment of the community that we want to focus on, because we know that they have, in some instances, some unique needs that we need to address. And so through the seniors needs assessment, we were able to do that. Ultimately, the findings, and I'll speak to a couple of the conclusions later on in the presentation here, but ultimately those conclusions get addressed through the broader social assessment, but wanted to speak just specifically to those seniors ones here a little bit now. So Christopher, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Rob. I appreciate that. And hi to everybody. Nice to see some people I met too, and meet some new folks here today. Kind of keeping my eyes on the chat box here as well, and people coming in and out of the meetings, just so I can let them in. But let's just get started here. So the actual social needs assessment here, as Rob kind of alluded to, I think our goal ultimately was really to take that big picture look and understand the broader needs of the people living in the region. I think a lot of the conversations that we ended up having were very far-reaching, wide-ranging. Certainly, as Rob suggested, the seniors project that him and his team were working on really kind of dove deeper into those seniors issues, but we wanted to get a look at everything. The goal again was to help certainly Andrea and her team, but also each of the different partners in the region make some better decisions and allocate resources. I think we're going to get to those recommendations. Tim's going to speak to that as we get closer to the end of the presentation. And again, there's kind of the breakdown of who's who in the zoo for our team. So our study process here, just to kind of give you some of the meat and potatoes of how we did this thing, we did some demographic and some social analysis, and we won't share a ton of that information today because there's quite a bit there, but I know the report would be available for those who are interested. And then after that, we gathered up, working with various different folks, the plans and the other documents that were available from previous work that have been done, not necessarily just around social need, but on other issues in the community. And we did a good review on that and tried to assemble as much information out of that as we could. We also did a lot of other different elements of kind of community-based research and some engagement work. So I'll speak a little bit to some of the work that Rob's team did there with the seniors piece as well as ours. You can kind of see the bulk and the broadness of what we had here. Seniors project, we had a huge number of folks there that filled in a survey that the team had constructed. So over 300 people filled that in, which was great. Did an agency level survey, which many of you, if you're working with seniors, would have actually contributed to. We had 28 different agencies that weigh in on that. And then various different stakeholder meetings when, you know, we were able to do those fun things like come and talk to people in person. Those were the days, right? So 17 of those meetings actually occurred between Rob and his team, which was great. So lots of data, and I won't speak to that. I won't steal Rob's thunder. He's going to come back to that. We do want to talk a little bit about the broader picture, though, that our team collectively worked on. So we did another survey, and again, this one was at the community level here. So we managed to get almost 360 people, 359 there, to spend a few moments and fill in that survey, and we were able to glean quite a bit of information there. One of the things that we found, which probably won't shock you guys, is that we had some interest in doing a little bit of a deeper dive on some of the issues that were specific for youth with our project here. So we actually did a very specific youth survey as well, and we had well over 100 people, 100 youth there fill that in, which was amazing. We were quite pleased and happy with that. And then also we did a lot of stakeholder meetings as well, face-to-face interviews, conversations at meetings like this. I know Rob came and visited you at an interagency meeting and tried to pick your brains about, you know, what you saw going on in the community and some of the issues and things that you're looking for there. So that was it in a nutshell there for how we did that. So I'm just going to keep going here, talk a little bit about some of those findings. So back to the big project, the community project, the overall broad social plan project. We did the survey here, and these are some of the priorities that kind of popped out of that survey, just so you guys can take a look at them. So percentage of responses here, you know, in terms of prioritization here, that's kind of how we've laid out this little graph that you can see here on the right-hand side of the table. So things like personal safety, huge areas of concern and interest there around that. Mental health with a focus obviously on depression and anxiety, which are huge everywhere. The lack of employment in the community, local services and their high levels of expense around that, the connectedness of different agencies and different individuals in the community, trying to make sure that that was strengthened. Housing and affordable housing in particular, making sure that that was discussed. Age-appropriate programming, isolation and loneliness, substance abuse and addictions, the positive relationships and relational breakdown there, basic needs. So that ties into a few of the things we see above there, obviously with things like housing and other elements, things like food security, violence and bullying, and then childcare options. So these are the things that were coming up in the survey. And as we take a look at some of the other information we'll get into later, when we start to look at recommendation, you'll see some themes that run across those. So I'll let you guys kind of reflect on that there, and happy to take some questions later from you. Continuing forward here, question we were asking with this particular type of information: what services, you know, people in the community that we spoke with would like to have access to in the region that maybe don't presently exist? So a couple of things jumped out here. One, kind of overwhelming around medical appointments, specialist medical appointments. Things around affordable housing again popping up, detox and treatment right in the community as opposed to have to leave the community. Another homeless shelter kind of related issue tying in with the housing issues, more programs and services that are focused on suicide prevention, things around specific things related to mental health like PTSD and trauma recovery, and then sexual health and STIs, and sexual assault just generally as another piece of the puzzle there, and then refugee and immigrant assistance. So those are some of the things that were kind of coming up as being needs, wants, desires based on the social needs that we saw in that previous slide there in the survey. And then just one final thing before I turn it over again to Rob to talk about some of the more senior specific data, is just to take a look at some of the information from the youth survey here. So we asked a question around quality of life to the youth in our survey here. And one of the things you can see from this little graph here is overall, you know, I'd say probably approaching 70% there of the youth in the community are fairly satisfied with their overall quality of life. But there's a kind of a big chunk there that's almost a quarter as well that are kind of ambivalent about that and still making some decisions, which means that things aren't probably as ideal as they might like. And then just a few in the other side there that have some, you know, very high levels of kind of dissatisfaction as well, right? So yeah, so that's some of the community survey findings and the youth survey findings there. So I'm just going to flip it over here to Rob again, and he's going to take it from here with the senior survey information. Away to you, Rob.
So what we've tried to do in this presentation, because we're not walking through all of the findings, is just share a little bit with you that might sort of tweak your interest, and I think the findings are interesting. So the senior survey, so we did field one that was entirely separate. And the other thing that sort of strikes me to mention it now, but we're presenting this now, and the study wrapped up a while ago, but when we fielded the surveys, we weren't in this pandemic, and so I can only imagine that there might be some changes to how people responded to this. And I'm thinking on the seniors one. So happiness levels, similar distribution really to the youth, probably a little bit higher in the happiness level, a little bit lower in the unhappiness. But I just sort of makes me wonder what it might be if we had fielded that and asked people about how things sort of how they feel about things now. So that was the happiness one. The next one, we asked about top 10 priorities. So we had given people, so the next slide, Christopher, we'd given people sort of a whole laundry list of potential issues and asked, you know, if they're experiencing them and if they exist in their lives. And then we asked about priorities. So what do they think the top 5 priorities are? And the font's a little bit small here, but so personal safety and affordable housing, right, by far, you can see really jumped up to the top. Safety was one that came up, if you recall, just a couple of slides ago on the broader community one, but the affordable housing is more significant for sure in the seniors one than it was in the overall community survey. You'll see mental health and then the lack of in-home support. So for sure, you know, we know that seniors themselves aren't a homogeneous population, and definitely the notion of safety and that lack of in-home supports impacts some of them a little bit more within some of the pockets of this population than all of them. Nonetheless, a couple of things that came up. So conclusions, a little bit more in the broader study, but we wanted to just share some of those high-level ones that led to these conclusions. So seniors population is increasing. Probably not a surprise. We know that we're aging. Generally, there's some happiness with quality of life. Does seem to be a fairly decent number of programs and services, but availability is a bit of an issue, and that even was reflected in the graph that Christopher showed about looking for some specialized appointments. But even awareness of the services, and that one can be a little bit tricky, because sometimes, you know, you can communicate about a service, but if people aren't really, you know, in the market for it, or they don't need it, they may not be paying attention to those messages. But nonetheless, I think there's some efforts that can go around awareness. And then that leads into that last bullet on this slide, which is ongoing communication and promotion. So it's sort of an ongoing effort that's needed there. And I don't think it's ever done in all the communities that we work in. The whole communication and promotion you know, comes up to some degree. And so I think it's important here. So of the services that are available, we need to make sure that people. Then the next slide just talks about some of the main issues that we identified through this. So transportation was a big one. I think we heard that a bit as well in the broader community one. The loneliness and isolation is the one in the mental health that I really thought about when I made the comment 2 slides ago or whatever about, you know, what would people say if we surveyed them now? And I would suspect that that might be a little bit more of an issue than it was at the time that we did this study. Affordability was an issue, again, heard it more broadly, but certainly within the seniors population, there's that affordable housing. And then safety. Safety is another one that I find is an interesting one because safety is really all about perception. And so, you know, even if statistics might show that we're safer than we had been, and I'm not suggesting that, I don't know what the stats are, but my point is if you don't feel safe, then that's an issue for you. And so a little bit different maybe between rural and urban, and we've heard things about rural crime, but nonetheless, some concerns about people and their lifestyle in the community and some main issues. Some are easier to address than others. And then the last bullet there is about connecting volunteers and seniors. So there's some seniors that are living by themselves, maybe aren't able to do some of the stuff around their homes that they had done. There's lots of volunteers that, you know, might be looking for some things. And it was in Caroline in particular, I remember that conversation where there was some good connections between, you know, a couple of volunteers and a couple of the seniors that needed it. And so that seems to me to be something else that, you know, if we could enhance that a little bit, that would really be quite beneficial. So we came up with conclusions for the seniors assessment, and then those really fit into the conclusions and recommendations in the social assessment. So we didn't want two things that were maybe interfering with each other, and so these fed nicely into the broader one. And so with that, Tim, I think it's you who's going to speak next.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. So just continuing on that theme. So we're switching back now to the general community survey and general community study. And in some ways, it's really nice that we had the opportunity to dovetail these two together. It kind of allowed a deeper dive into the seniors area and reflection on the findings there with the findings in the general community process. So looking at, as Christopher mentioned, the various data inputs. So between the document review that we did and the interviews that we did and the surveys that were done, putting that all together and coming up with sort of a list of conclusions and recommendations. So one of those was employment and job training, and not surprising probably from a number of perspectives. The oil industry, the resource industry is depressed. So I think that the region feels that more than some areas of the province. And that has a direct reflection with how people are feeling about employment and job training, and then layer COVID on top of that. And as Rob mentioned, the seniors work was done pre-COVID. This work was done sort of as COVID started ramping up and becoming a real problem. So looking at that employment and job training, layer those two things on. It's not that they're not very real and legitimate concerns. It's also that should those things change, COVID hopefully is on its way out, and the energy sector hopefully will turn around. So that will be a dynamic finding as we go forward. Housing and homelessness. So certainly encouraging the periodic homelessness counts, building on the Stone Soup initiative that's going on, conversations in the community about homelessness and what might be able to be done about that, which links into housing options, affordable housing, subsidized housing, low cost housing, and how that figures into people's social needs and social wellness. We heard quite a number of comments about there are rental properties available. However, they can tend to be rather high cost, and there is significant competition for them. So we looked at drug substance abuse and addictions, increase the number of opportunities for substance abuse and addictions programs. And as Rob mentioned, part of this is probably a first step is looking at the awareness. So maximizing the current programs and services in terms of utilization through communication, awareness building, before you go ahead and build more. Reviewing the inclusion programs, we had feedback from some people that for a number of reasons, they didn't qualify for the programs that were there, but thought they would be beneficial to them. And the development of follow-up services. Because we're talking to agencies and organizations, you're very aware that once you complete a program, not the end of the road. So what are those follow-up services that can stay connected as people go through that cycle, potentially reoccurrence or needing some additional help or moving on to whatever that next level of support might be. Mental health supports, consider the development of a community-based helpline so that people know where to call, and from that call will know where to get in touch with and engaged with appropriate services and supports. And implement an information campaign on we all need help sometime. So breaking that stigma that seems to surround mental health, that if you need that somehow, that's a failing on your part instead of like any other mental health or medical condition. We all need medical assistance at some point, and mental health is really no different. Looking at relationships and a fairly broad area that includes parenting, development, programs and services, information for children and youth so they understand what positive relationships are, relationships within a family so that there are expectations around what proper parent-child interactions sort of look like and are modeled around. So a number of things that go into that relationships category. Violence and bullying. It comes up pretty much in every project that we do in terms of social needs assessment or social development plans. Wasn't as high as some communities when we looked at it in relation to other things, but certainly community-based statements and messaging around violence and bullying in terms of what's acceptable, what isn't acceptable. It's building that value base about what is not okay in terms of behavior relative to violence and bullying, and continue to support existing initiatives. We certainly heard there are a number of existing initiatives that are working. So again, it might be utilization, but continuing to build on those. Family and domestic violence. Again, we've seen a spike pretty much across the province relative to family and domestic violence based on economic conditions, based on people being out of jobs, needing to work at home or be at home. So those back to the relationships and how that's all working. If one of the partners is normally away for long periods of time, it's quite a different dynamic when that changes. And increase related to prevention. So seems like there's a shelter in the area. There's those sort of acute supports that are there, but the increased effort in terms of prevention so that it gets engaged and gets dealt with before people are in need of shelter services. Isolation and loneliness. Again, this can be intensified by COVID. You are looking at a region, and the region has rural areas, and in some of the rural areas, we heard under the quality of life that people liked the rural areas and liked the spacing and really appreciated that. But it can also lead to some isolation and loneliness if there's not opportunities to engage with neighbors, engage with the broader community. And one suggestion we made was to look at the Canadian Index of Wellbeing survey and see if that might be something that would be useful and helpful for the community to pursue. Basic needs not met, food security. So consider ways to increase food donations outside the peak donation time. Again, not a tremendously new issue. Seasonal times, Christmas tends to be times when people donate to food banks and other food programs. How to broaden that out so that there's other opportunities to provide collection points and to be able to have those resources on hand as needed. And then one of the things is a look at sort of community gardening, fruit trees, edible forests. I mean, all of these sort of grassroots food-related types of activities for two reasons. One is the actual provision of food at certain times. But the other one is also it just builds that awareness that yes, in our community, there are people who need to take advantage of food services in a number of different forms. It's not only about food banks, it's really about a mindset that this is something that we can build into our community in a number of ways. Rob touched on personal safety and absolutely, as he indicated, there's the actual issues of safety as well as the perception of safety. So whether that's neighborhood watch programs, different lighting in different areas, identifying from youth perspective areas that they feel unsafe in, or seniors perspectives areas they feel unsafe in, and finding ways to mitigate those. Agency interactions and connectedness. So you have within Clearwater a number of really good agency interconnections, whether it's the interagency types of models or agencies working with agencies around a wraparound kind of service. So certainly those are there. We're suggesting that maybe the interagency model be intensified a little bit. So rather than information sharing, or in addition to information sharing, there's opportunities to case conference in ways that are still respectful and mindful of anonymity and the FOIP provisions, but looking at how to be able to connect people to a multitude of services they may need without having to go and sort of visit each one or be aware of each one individually. And perhaps a social development council or that kind of a model. And then within the community, so the previous one was agency interactions, but within the community, so to build on the neighborhood-based activities, so neighbors knowing neighbors. We heard from a number of people that, well, I know of this person in my neighborhood or this family in my neighborhood, and because I'm an agency, I can help to get them connected to some things that they might find helpful. How to broaden that out so that there's a understanding in the broader community that if you know people or see people that need supports and services, there's a way to get them involved in that. We heard a lot about things like Market on Main. So as a way beyond goods and services, but it seemed like a really good opportunity for people to come out, get together, spend some time together. Of course, COVID put a real wrinkle in that, but looking at that event and how to emulate it or duplicate it in other ways, so that there are a number of opportunities for people to come out and get together. Just briefly in terms of the implementation. So one of the things we're suggesting is a launch event. Again, COVID kind of gets in the way of some of those things, and that's why the type of session that we're having today. But from our perspective, a launch event would be bringing agencies and organizations together, looking at the priorities, deciding by a number of means what the initial ones would be that people are interested in working on, forming some work groups to develop strategies, actions, and then actually, putting boots on the ground and getting some work started in whatever those priorities are. And in the report, there's a bit of a matrix in terms of how to evaluate which things would go first and which things would come after. Some sort of social master plan implementation committee. Now, committee sometimes sounds good and sometimes sounds bureaucratic, but some group that would have the responsibility to ensure that this moves forward. And keeping in mind the time frame for this is 3 years to 5 years and beyond. So there's a need to keep the continuity going and the momentum going, and that's what this group would look at being. And as well, it is a regional plan. So beyond the town, there's the county, village, and the rural areas, as well as the First Nation areas. So how to make sure all of those parts stay connected and stay engaged. Encouragement to put the priorities into the individual work plans of the various organizations and agencies, and an annual review process, report to the citizens, information back to councils about what's going well and what needs some assistance, and then ongoing methods of engaging residents so that they know every year, every couple of years, you're going to come back and say, this is what we've done. What do you think? Do you see a difference? Is this making things better? Are there other things we need to address? So it becomes an ongoing dialogue and conversation rather than see you in 5 years and we'll take the next step then in terms of engaging you again. People kind of want to be involved and see what their time and their effort has resulted in. And then, of course, to plan for a 3-year and a 5-year review to do exactly that, determine what's working, and if necessary, do more of it, decide what may not be working as well, and what might be required to correct that course. And then if there are things that just simply are no longer relevant, boot them off the plan and see if there are other things that take their place. So I think that's probably where we'll stop at this point and see if there are any questions. I would like, before we sort of close, to say that I really commend the 3 municipalities and Andrea and her FCSS program and the board that's there for entering into this kind of a process. It's not easy. Many things like, my favorite example is paving roads. You know which roads, you know how much paving, you know where it will go to, and you know how long it'll last. But social things are not quite that concrete, or asphalt, I suppose. So, congratulations from all 3 of us in terms of taking this on and being interested in putting a broad plan like this together that engages everybody in the ways that they can and have available to them. So Rob and Christopher, unless I missed anything, I'll open it up to some questions or comments.